There are four words that I've heard thousands of times since I've been on this board. People say over and over again, and it's Fulbright changed my life. I've heard it from 87-year-old retired people, and I've heard it from 22-year-olds just out of school. So if you have a chance to apply for a Fulbright, if you think of a project, an opportunity to go abroad and engage in the world, we hope you will. Tonight you're going to learn some of the ways that people have done that and what their stories have been.
It's really an honor to be here at Pitzer because you are the leaders in the Fulbright's achievements. So I'm so glad to be able to be with you here today. It's my first trip since becoming Assistant Secretary 7 weeks ago. So this is my first foray outside of the State Department. So it's only appropriate, I think, that it be a Pitzer. And I just wanted to thank President Trombley for this gracious hosting of the Fulbright Board. We're really honored to be with you.
That we've formed this panel of 5 Pitzer alumni who've won Fulbrights. And what we've asked them to do, very briefly, it's meant to be interactive, and so this is largely going to be Q&A, but they will very briefly talk about what it was that motivated them to apply for Fulbright in the first place. This is a very diverse group of people in terms of their interests, where they went and so forth, but a common denominator among them is that as juniors, applying for Fulbright was not necessarily on their radar screen. They are not necessarily the high probability applicants, and yet they did apply for Fulbright. They won a Fulbright, and so I want them to talk on the one hand about what it was that motivated them to this. The second thing we want to them to talk about is, and Tom referenced this a second ago, is just how the experience changed them. What winning a Fulbright, what completing a Fulbright has done to them, and the effect that it's had on them.
I started thinking about that terrible catch-22 that every undergraduate faces when they graduate from college, which is you need experience to get a job, but how do you get that experience if you don't have it? And the Fulbright for me was really the perfect solution, or at least I conceived of it in my mind as the perfect solution to get the experience that I needed to then move on in my career, or at least establish a career of some sort. I hadn't really thought it through much more than that, to be honest. So I knew sort of what I was getting into, and I knew the culture that I was getting into, but I had just had, in a way, kind of a surface level interaction with it. I had lived for a semester in a little village just an hour outside of Ankara. I farmed sugar beets with a lovely family, and I went to a Turkish university for a semester. But then when I got there, I found that there were so many more layers of Turkey that I had never even encountered, even in that whole semester living in a little village and going to school there, because I had a much more sort of long-term relationship with people and with the culture. And I started to sort of add new layers onto my understanding of what Turkey was. And then after that, it really sort of set me on this pathway that ended up with me joining the Foreign Service, getting the rest of my hat trick of fellowships, and serving 3 tours in the Foreign Service, and now I'm with the Department of Homeland Security, where I work still on international issues, and I work on how people move from one country to another. And so I would say that all the seeds of those things were laid in my Fulbright, because I started to develop a sense of what it was like to be a person in the world in a way that I had never been able to do before.
I learned a lot. I mean, as a Fulbright scholar, I went there as an ETA, thinking that there's going to be teaching assistants, so I would be paired up with another teacher there, and doing all kinds of teaching assignments. And yet I was mostly babysitting because I had no idea what I was doing. They dropped me in the classroom the first day I got there. Hey, here, teach. You're a teacher, so you're supposed to teach. And I was like, I don't speak the language. They don't understand English. I mean, mind you, they placed me in the middle of countryside, Khon Kaen province, which is the northeastern part of Thailand. And for the initial month, as soon as I got to Thailand, they put us into a dormitory at the university there, taught us the language, culture, and everything. But they didn't tell us that the place we were being sent was a rural part, also have their own dialect and have their own culture. So this was going to another totally different culture, or actually country, and they speak their own dialect. So I was really lost. But then, the students really helped me out. So my initial thinking was, I'm there to teach them, I'm there to help them, and yet, now that I think about it, they helped me more. They taught me more about who I am as a person now, and also how to live in a very difficult situation like that. But the tricky part about development, I was talking with Professor Laco again earlier, was the fact that we always, go to the different countries or any kind of development, we engage in it with this mindset that we're there to help people, and yet we always forget that we're there to help them to help themselves, and that was the key. And I think this Fulbright program really taught me that it's not about me going there to help them, but it's for me to initially unlock that potential and tell them that, no, you have the power to change yourself. And that's what I learned from this Fulbright program.
So as Nigel mentioned, I have the least linear path of anyone on this stage. When I came to college, I was the first person in my family to go to school. I was what you'd call like a casino brat, because I was born in Atlantic City. I grew up in Southern Nevada, and then my mom started working in the tribal casinos out here in Southern California. So it was by no means expected that I was even going to go to school. So while I was in Georgia, my project was looking at the way that the Georgian public was being educated about NATO membership, and specifically the accession process. So all the reforms that you have to make for your military and the way that your government functions in order to get membership into NATO. Now, I had anticipated I'd get to work with the military and talk to those people, but the second week I was in country, they had parliamentary elections that were not deemed to be suitable, and it was a giant mess. So no one wanted to talk to me about my project. Absolutely no one wanted to talk about NATO, no one wanted to talk about the EU, no one wanted to talk about anything. So I had to really think on my feet about how I was going to get the kinds of interviews and the kinds of feedback I needed to make my project happen. So it forced me to go an end around and talk to cultural organizations and informal networks like soccer supporters clubs and fan bases for big bands in Georgia, and these sort of non-structural organizations where people would meet, gather, and then talk about what was going on. So ultimately, real life happened to my Fulbright, and it made my Fulbright experience so much richer and so much more engaging and surprising than I had really thought it was going to be. And I did not end up a professor, but the ability to think and pivot has served me well throughout. And I don't think I would have really understood what that meant until I was on a Fulbright in that situation.
So I came to Pitzer, having grown up in a Korean household. My parents don't speak English. And so I came here not having ever gone abroad. And I remember freshman year, there was a flyer in the mailroom advertising for a summer program in Nepal for freshmen. And I remember the words anthropological research, which I didn't know what that meant, because I came into Pitzer as a pre-med student. I knew I wanted to go into medicine, I want to say junior year of high school. And I spent most of my time over at Joint Science. And I saw this flyer in the mailroom and applied. And I was one of 6 chosen to go on a research trip to Nepal. And I think that pretty much launched me on a path of being abroad for the last 5 years. And I actually had spent a summer in Washington State doing research at UW. And I remembered reading a paper about research that was going on in Belgium. And my boss in Washington collaborated with someone in Belgium, so it was sort of pretty much set for me. And I spent 2011 to 2012 doing a lab-based science research project abroad, working with yeast cells and seeing how genetic mutations in yeast have a phenotypic effect. So I had a great time. I spent this past year applying to med schools, and I'm currently interviewing, and I want to say all of my interviewers have asked me about the Fulbright. The first thing they ask me when I come into the room is, Fulbrights, those are hard to get. Tell me about it. So definitely life-changing in that aspect. As for my future, I'm going to be working with patients from all different walks of life. And I think the Fulbright and my past experiences have definitely prepared me to be sensitive to different cultural issues that can't be taught in the classroom.
But here I am, first day of class, Fletcher Hall. I'm in a really nice room. My high school didn't have anything like it. I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. 20 of my peers. I was the only Latino there, so quick culture shock there. I was like, oh wow. Everybody sounds so smart. Everybody's asking questions. The professor's talking about the role that language plays in politics. In my head, that doesn't really compute. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? And so I was a little intimidated, stood quiet. And when class ended, I went back to my room. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of upset a little bit. I was kind of frustrated because I felt a little unprepared. And so I was like, if I want to be a successful student here at Pitzer, I have to work twice as hard. I have to kind of, hustle and be that student that I want to be. And so my definition of a successful student, and this evolved throughout my 4 years at Pitzer, but it essentially became go to school, do well, study, get the good grades, also become part of the community, participate in local clubs. I joined the student senate, I joined the investment committee, volunteer at a local detention center for incarcerated youth. And then come senior year, everywhere you saw Fulbright, it's marketed here, marketed there. And so it's like, hey, you know what? I think that earning a Fulbright is, to some degree, it's self-validation that you've become a great student, that you've been molded in such a way that you can make your school proud. I ended up applying, went to Mexico, and frankly, I had one of the best experiences I've had so far. As I interacted with the local population, including my coworkers, random people while playing soccer, I realized that at a fundamental level, despite our differences in, culture, religion, language, or what have you, at the fundamental level, we as people want similar things, and that's to be able to provide for our families, to be able to obtain an education. And that really got in my academic interest. And I decided to do public policy and then education at Duke in hopes that someday I might be able to make a positive contribution to my community by expanding educational opportunities for students like myself who come from underserved communities.
One of the sort of core values that I think we've all touched on really is that it's all about experiential learning. And that when all of us went abroad on Pitzer programs, it's not that we were spending time in a dorm in another university that happened to be in another country. We were there with people experiencing their lives. And that's what really creates a connection between you and another country on a much more fundamental level.
The fact that Pitzer acknowledges the value of going abroad and not only studying abroad in the traditional sense, but really staying with host families, immersing yourself in cultures, getting the language down, I think that makes for, I want to say, an ideal candidate for the Fulbright to already have the level of cultural sensitivity and understanding before you enter into any cultural situation.
2 reasons. First, I wanted to reconnect with my cultural roots, and so Mexico provided that opportunity. The second, at the time I was interested in finance, economics, and Mexico was the only program, aside from Spain, but Spain was for graduate students. But Mexico provided a binational business grant to be able to work for a bank and take MBA courses, and so it just kind of fit in perfectly with my interests.
The moment I realized I am no longer in a comfort zone, I don't know what I'm doing, which is how I felt when I came to college. So I'd already experienced that, so it kind of had dulled it a little bit for me. And we had all been so stressed out. It had been really taxing. I had been an election monitor for essentially 6 months. Like, they'd had several rounds of voting, so I was just exhausted. My roommate was teaching in a school. My other roommate was doing peace building through theater. Like, we were spent. So we were like, we're gonna go to the wine region. This will be great. We're gonna see this beautiful part of the country, and it'll be super easy and super relaxing. And then we get there, and we we should have known this, but there wasn't any infrastructure to go see these places. Like, they're like people's houses, and then they have these amazing grapes that grow, and then they make wine, and then it goes places. And there are wineries, but they're very far away. And there was a moment when we're in a guy's basement. He has an underground like pot. There's a term for it, but of wine that is waiting from that year's harvest, and he's scooping it out into a water bottle to give to us, and he won't take any money. Where at that moment, I 100% realized, this is insanity. And that gentleman who gave us that wine, I am friends with him on Facebook. And I still, like, I see pictures of his kids. Like, it's those moments where it's like, this is crazy and wonderful and amazing, and you don't know if you should cry or scream or laugh at what's going on. And you just kind of accept it. And that was an amazing moment in my life.
My most difficult moment, I would say, on the Fulbright is I was at Bill Kent University, and I ended up writing sort of a master's thesis and turned my Fulbright project into a master's thesis. And I was describing what I was going to write about, which is why leftist political parties in Turkey fail. Like why their electoral strategy is no good. So I was describing this to one of my colleagues, and she says, "Oh, very positivist." And I did not know what that word meant. I had no clue. And I was like, "Yes, absolutely. That's total. I'm a very positivist person. That's just who I am." And then later on, I had to go back and look at the dictionary and figure out what in the world she was talking about. But that was just sort of symptomatic of a larger issue in that they were coming at their educations from just a very different place.
So I worked at a bank, and I was I interacted with traders who, at the press of a button, they could send hundreds of thousands of dollars around the world and make money. And one day I started walking home. I take the metro and I see a young family, from Mayan descent, and poor, just begging for money. And for me, just that level of disparity in the country just became very frustrating, because you want to do something, but you really can't do much because you're not in a position to create any the change that you want to see. And so it was just getting used to those differences that for me took time and brought some frustrations along the way. But you get to live with that, and hopefully someday you'll be in a position to be able to enact some change in that regard.
For me, most difficult part was working with children. While I was in college, I always told everyone, I hate kids. What am I doing? Just never gonna have kids. And the first day I walk in, there's 40 kids looking at me. It's like, hello, I'm American. It's like, everybody give you that look. It's like, why are you American? You should be speaking Thai. And everybody would just laugh every time I would say something like, hi. And they would laugh. And my name is Paul. They would laugh because there's like this Asian guy speaking English to them. So. And that was very difficult.
The lab I was in, it's an international lab. Our PI made us all speak English, and no Dutch was allowed. Though by the end of my stay, that was not so enforced as much. But for me, like I said, I really loved learning languages, so I signed up for a Dutch course. Unfortunately, I couldn't complete it because I just got so consumed by my project. But I actually found it quite necessary, especially in going to the supermarket and really figuring out different cuts of meat, and especially trying to avoid horse. I definitely know the Dutch word for horse. And also, Belgians really do appreciate it if you make an effort to learn the language, especially Dutch, because not many people know how to speak it.
For me also, definitely learning the language is important. But right now, especially in my current job, we deal with several different groups of hill tribe groups. And, it's at least 7 different languages. And the newest edition is Burmese, so it's really difficult trying to keep track of all that. But while I was in my Fulbright program, they spoke the dialect, which they call it Lao or Laotian, that we call, and because it's the same people. back in the day. So I had trouble, communicating people in Bangkok who spoke Central Thai, but when I went to Laos and spoke to Laotians, in Vientiane, for example, I had much easier time. So that was a totally different country. So it really depends on which area you're at too. I had a better time when I was visiting Laos than Bangkok, even though it was the same country. So in that sense, I think learning the language is also very important. Also understanding who your neighbors are, from a smaller scale to even bigger scale. I think it's really helpful.
I wish that I had taken a bigger risk and gone to somewhere further afield. I was in Ankara, the capital. If I had been in Van, which is down by the Iranian border, or Trabzon, or one of these other places, I would have been forced to immerse myself in Turkish culture and Turkish society in a whole other way.
I think I was so nervous about getting the Fulbright that I didn't even think about applying for like a multi-country one. Because once I got in the region, I was like, oh, well, clearly there's connectivity between my research and what's going on in Armenia and in Azerbaijan and like all these neighboring countries. But I was so fixated on, I have this one project in this one place and it will go well, that once you get there and you see that there's all this whole world that connects to what you're interested in, your view expands.
Please join me in thanking our 5 panelists here tonight. Thank you.